My name is Cheryl Noordhoek, and I'm an occupational therapist, and I have been an OT for just over 20 years. And I have always worked in peds, and I have always worked in schools. And I absolutely love what I do. And I have been a teletherapist for 11 weeks, just like all of you. And when someone told me that that was kind of what we were going to look at, the first inkling I had that that's where things were going to go was when we got that link from Travelers on the 13th of March saying, go to this webinar on teletherapy. And it was an online webinar with a speech therapist named Jill Shook. And that was the first I had really kind of looked into teletherapy and got things started from there. So who knew we'd be working with students on Zoom? I didn't. One of my assignments along the way in my career was in a district that was a little bit more remote, and they hadn't been able to get an OT in their building for a couple years before I got there. So they had had an online therapist. And what I heard up until the very last day of school was how happy they were to have a real person. So not only was I not familiar with teletherapy, I was a skeptic. I thought, how am I going to get these kids to get excited about this? How am I going to get this done? How am I going to make this meaningful? And what's going to happen? So what I did from that point on was start to look at what other people were doing, what speech therapists were doing, how they were making that work, what they were able to get in with kids. And then I looked at how do I do that? And how do I make that OT? And how do I make that part of what I've always done? How do I make that teach the skills I've always taught? And how do I keep it real to what I was doing and make it meaningful for kids? And one of the first things I came to was teletherapy might not be my first choice, or even in my mind when I started this, the best choice, but it was the only choice. It was the only way I could stay connected to my kids. I could keep my kids moving towards their goals. I could support my school and do all of those kinds of things. So when I came at it from that perspective, that I was going to do the very best I could to make this time meaningful with my kids, it made a big difference for me. So in the last 11 weeks, I've evolved and I've come up with a lot of different activities to bring on, and I want to share those with you. So I'm going to spend as much of my time as I can talking about activities and what you can do on Zoom and how it works and what kinds of things I've been able to make work as I go along. One of the things I think that's helped me is I've kind of always been into the technology piece of it. I was an early adapter of the iPad. I used a lot of that with my kids when it was novel and not everyone had one at home, so it was even more meaningful. So I have done a lot of that technology piece, and I've enjoyed that. I will say the Zoom technology took me a little bit of time to get caught up with and to get into, but I feel like at this point we're pretty much running. I want to talk about 4 different things. I want to talk about Zooming into kids' homes and what that means and some of the tips and tricks of things that I've used to make Zoom more helpful for me. And then I want to spend most of my time on activities. I want to show you some of the things I've done over the last 11 weeks and the kinds of things that you might be able to adapt to do online. And then I have a list of resources, and it's not an exhaustive list. It's kind of what I've used over the time that I've been doing this and some places to start. And then I want to save time at the end for some questions and give you what I think are like my big tips. So I hope this is helpful, and I'm just going to jump right into Zoom. So hopefully, I'm assuming most districts have used Zoom, and that's what I was hearing from all my colleagues. I was a Chicago OT for a long time and worked in a co-op there. So I've been in contact with those therapists and several different therapists in California, and everybody seems to use Zoom until I was talking to one of my private regional center clients, and she said, oh, we're using Google Meet. Can you meet us on Google Meet? So I hope I can, and I'm going to figure that out by the end of the week. But most people seem to be using Zoom, and Zoom has evolved since we started and made things better for us as therapists, safer for kids at home, and done some great things to kind of support us. And if we have time, I'm going to go to my profile settings at the end and show you some helpful things to click on your profile. And some of those include things like setting up remote control, monitoring how you want to do the chat, getting yourself some warnings when people are coming and going from your meetings, those kinds of things. The chat piece, they have done it so that kids can't side chat now. Zoom is taking care of that for us. When I started, I was working with a private client and her mom, and she's a really well-behaved kid, and I never would have guessed this would have been an issue, but she and some friends were doing some private chats, and they were getting into some trouble with the classroom teacher because those private chats, teachers didn't know what was happening in them. They couldn't be seen by the teacher. So Zoom's taking care of that and eliminated the chance for that side chatting. There's a chance for everyone to chat. And I've had a couple of my students come on and just start typing words. These were my students on the spectrum. And at first I was like, how is this helping us? How do I get them back in the group? But with a couple of my students, it's been a way to have a really interesting conversation and they're more willing to type what they want to say to me than they are necessarily to say it. So I have some sessions where we do part of our session just chatting back and forth. So chat can have some positive things. Plus it lets me know when I forgot to unmute myself. Those kinds of things are easier if you have your chat open. The remote control, if you are able to share remote control with your kids, I think that gives them an incredible amount of control and lets them be part of the session. It works on their mouse control. Giving them something to do keeps them more engaged in what they're doing. So I think that remote control, when it works, is fabulous. There's a setting in Zoom that you enable remote control, but other than that, it seems to be about what kind of technology the kids are using. Chromebooks are notoriously not great for being able to do remote control, and that's what my district has most of the students on. Those kids who are on their parents' computers or on some pretty updated iPads are able to do remote control, and they like to, and I'll show you some games where it's fun for them to have remote control. The annotate feature is nice. You can go ahead and write things, and my understanding is that works even outside of remote control, so kids can write some things, and I'll show you some ways I've used that. The other thing that's helped me, and I didn't do it the first several weeks, was to let parents know what I wanted them to have. So our district kind of did this no paper and pencil activities. We weren't supposed to be doing a lot of that. So we did, we're trying to interact everything on the computer. And what I found was there are some things as an OT, I just need kids to be able to write some stuff down. So when I ask people in advance, could you have either a whiteboard and a marker or a paper and pencil? And is it possible that we could sit either at the table or at a desk so that they have some support for working? That helped. Because I've had kids show up online with me in their beds. I just lost my lights because I'm in my classroom. I've had kids show up in their beds, which isn't ideal. I've had kids show up eating snacks, which for me is no big deal because I consider it my crunchy snack part of self-regulation. But for my speech therapy colleagues, it's been really hard when they're trying to talk with food in their mouth. So letting parents know what the expectations are. Maybe your district sent out something saying, these are the Zoom rules, these are what we'd like you to do, these are what we'd like you to help your students do. But even when it's come out, sometimes we've had to circle back. I work in one of my classrooms is a transitional kindergarten. And we had most of our students showing up without shirts. And in groups, we decided that probably wasn't the best thing going into everybody else's home. So we just sent a little email saying, hey, would it be okay if you dressed your students just like you would send them to school? Because someday we're going back and making that transition to what has to happen for school versus home. It would be great if we were connecting that school related expectations right to what you're doing at home. So we asked for that and it's happened this last week or so without a problem. So that's been really helpful. But letting parents know, because they may not know what we expect them to do. I often get kids on chairs that are too big and tables that aren't quite the right height. And that kind of stuff I just have to be flexible about. I just have to know that it's not a therapy room and I can't control everything. And for me, that's tough because I like to really set kids up. So knowing that I can't control everything and it's going to be different at home, and that's okay. The other thing to kind of remember when you're in somebody's house is we see all kinds of other things that are going on in the background, and people don't always realize what's gonna transmit through Zoom. I've had sessions that were interrupted by barking dogs, like crazy barking dogs. I also had a session one time where I had a student and he was ready to work with me, and his parents were so excited to have 30 minutes of him working with me that for some reason, like some neighbors came over and I had 4 adults chatting while I was trying to do a session. And the best I could do was say to my little friend on the line, hey, would you grab your headphones? Because I think that'll help you focus. And then I put on my headphones with my speaker and we were able to at least tune it out. But it's a box of chocolates and you never know what you're gonna get when you're in somebody's house. And then there's screen sharing, and hopefully you've been able to share your screen. I'll show you a couple of different screen shares that I like to use and that I am able to bring in more resources through some of my screen sharing. So that's sort of an overview of Zoom. And if we have time at the end, I'll go back and show you some of the profile stuff, but I want to make sure I have time to do some activities. So the first thing I tried to think of is, what was I going to do on Zoom? Because it was different. But one of the things that I landed on right away was I need to do things that I did when I saw the kids. I need to do the same kinds of activities that I was doing when I was with them, because then they knew it was me. They knew I was the OT lady. They knew I had fun games. They knew they were going to practice their writing. The expectations came back to us when we started to do the same activities. So finding something familiar and figuring out how to make it work on Zoom, I think is one of the really important things. I did a lot of Go Noodle with kids, and Go Noodle is one of those things that I can pull up with kids now and we can sing and dance and be crazy and do Go Noodle, and then we can do some of our fine motor. So I'm working in my sensory regulation. I'm bringing back what's familiar. Our favorite Go Noodle with my students right now is the roller coaster. So I try and have all of my things open in my upper taskbar, but I can go right to Go Noodle, and we can go right to Go Noodle and we can do an activity. I can make it full screen. I can't get rid of the ads though, unfortunately. So we can do Go Noodle online. And we do the roller coaster because it lets us be loud at the beginning. It lets us move. It lets us get our wiggles out. Plus we did it before, so it's familiar. So we go to and do Go Noodle quite a bit, and I'm doing my therapy sessions. We also do, the other thing that I found that worked really well online was to do some guided drawings with kids. And I don't know if you're familiar with Mo Willems and the pigeon books, but the kids seem to love those. And he did this amazing thing during the COVID virus. Every day from 11 to 12 Eastern time, he does lunch doodles with Mo Willems, and it's done through, he records it, and the kids get to do guided drawings. They get to see his studio. He shows them books. He shows them books that he didn't even publish. So it's a pretty long segment, and it's too much for me to do in an OT session. I use it as a resource for kids, but I've done some guided drawings. And so the first week I was doing teletherapy, we did Go Noodle, and we did how to draw a pigeon. So it's amazing to me the things that you can find on YouTube, and other people have probably been using their therapy a lot more than I have. But I love to do guided drawings. Do the pigeon drawing. So in 2.5 minutes, we've drawn a pigeon, and he does line by line. His pacing is really good. He lets kids, have time to catch up. He's really positive about his drawings when he's doing it. And I find I can get kids to draw a lot more easily than I can get them to write. And that's okay, because if I look at a guided drawing and the requirements for it, they're very similar to the requirements and the underlying developmental skills I need for handwriting. So we've done a lot of guided. I've taught kids to draw things that really I wouldn't have thought of before, but because I needed to find something that worked in this environment, we've done a lot of guided drawings. And so our first week, we danced with Go Noodle, we did some guided drawing. I could scaffold them for the kids because I could stop and help them do an individual demonstration. I'm not an artist, and I don't pretend to be. And so when I do my drawings, they're not perfect. And so I'm teaching kids right then that they don't have to do it perfectly. I make mistakes, sometimes not, but then I go ahead and erase and fix them. So I let kids know that that's what I did. The other thing about Zoom is you have to be animated. That was one of the first things. Margaret Curley did a webinar for travelers about teletherapy. And that was one of the things she said is I have to be really animated and I have to be bigger than life. And I didn't really realize that. And that's so true, because the kids can't get the subtlety of how much we like them or how much we want to be with them or how proud we are of them. So we have to be bigger and louder and brighter about all of that with them. So we've done a lot of guided drawings and a lot of Go Noodle. And that's kind of how we got things started the first week. And then from there, I was able to get a little braver and try some of my other activities. So Google Slides. I'm not sure how many of you have used Google Slides. My district uses them, so I've gotten a couple slideshows, but I've never really put my own together. And I didn't realize that it was as easy as it was to kind of create them. You can share them, they create their own link, and then they can be shared really easily. And the other thing I like about them is the students, if I send them a copy of them, they can interact with them. So they can put things in place. I'm going to show you, one of my classrooms is a functional skills middle school. And so the OT's role in that is to teach activities of daily living. And so once a week we do a little group. And when I was in their classroom, I had all kinds of things I could do. I'm one of those OTs that has like boxes and boxes of games and stuff. Well, when we went to teletherapy and none of my stuff helped me get the kids, I really had to find another way. So we've done some activities of daily living online with Zoom. And one of the things we did, I did a little Google Doodle. And so I sent it out to the parents and everybody clicked that they wanted their kids to learn how to set the table. So I did my first Google slide on how to set the table. And I will show you a clip of it. So here's my setting the table. And like I was saying about YouTube, I didn't even realize how many amazing, I didn't know you could find things about setting the table on YouTube and making a bed on YouTube, but there's great stuff available if you take a peek. So this was a quick little video that I found on YouTube, and it talked about how to set the table. And I'm gonna play just a little minute of it here so I can take a breath.
Hi kids, thanks for joining me today. Today I'm going to teach you the proper way to set a table and a technique you can use so you will always remember. All you have to remember is forks. Pretty easy so far, right? So whether you're helping out at home or helping set the table at a friend or relative's house, you'll know what to do. Ready to get started? Let's go.
This is our favorite part, when the dog chases the cat across the screen.
Mojo is always chasing Dolly Doo.
So here is the part that I wanted from the video. So F is for your fork, O is your plate, forget the R, K is your knife, and S is your spoon. So the kids watch this video, and then my next slide shows them how things go, how to get the pieces into place. And then I did a slide where they had to move the pieces. So when I sent this to them, now all these pieces are movable. So I can start with my F. My fork's underneath, it's gonna make it harder. I can start with my fork and I can put it on the left. The O is my plate, it goes in the middle. I forget the R. The K is my knife. And the S is my spoon. So the kids can move them all into place. So this was the first week I taught this lesson. The next week we watched it again, but before I did the lesson, I posted on the Google Classroom, hey, could you have your student have a cup, a fork, a knife, a spoon, and a plate so that we can practice setting the table together. So then we went ahead and set the table together. And I was able to do that on a document camera so they could see it. And when we get a little further on, I'll show you my document camera so that you can see how I was able to show them more in real time what setting the table looked like. So that was an activity I would have done in their classroom, but I was able to turn it into an activity that I could do online with them. And then their parents could do it again with them, and we had some really good participation with that. There are also some amazing people out there who are putting together resources, and a lot of them are free, for some Google Slides, things that you can use and share. So this is a Google Slides deck that I got from the OT Toolbox, and I have a list of references at the end, so you'll get all of that. But what she did was put together several activities that would go in an OT session into a Google Slide document so that we could use them all when we were online with kids. So this was the outer space theme. Hoping it's going to let me present it. So the other thing about online and teletherapy is at some point the technology is going to glitch. And as soon as I decided that that was going to happen once a day, and so now when it happens to me, I'm like, okay, good, that's done. And now maybe the rest of the day will go a little more smoothly. But so she puts this together, and you just signed up for it, and they sent it for free. But she does a warm up. So she does a breathing warm up. She does a writing activity. She does a fine motor task and a visual perceptual matching task, and then she does the calm down. So we did our outer space breaths. So I would have them do the breathing in and breathing out while I slowly moved my mouse. So we did our deep breaths, and then we had a little writing piece. So if I were an alien, my name would be, and so they got to pick their name. So for my students who could just write this down, so we chatted about it and they would tell me what they wanted. If there were any words that they wanted me to spell, I could do that for them online. So I could come up to the annotate feature and I could say text and make a text box. And if he told me his alien name was Saturn Sam, I could type it. And then they could do visual copying as opposed to having to write it from memory. And for some of my students, I said, okay, we're going to write the whole sentence. We're going to write, if I were an alien, my name would be. For some of my students, we just worked on Saturn Sam. For some of my students, I just said, okay, if I were an alien, my name would be Kyle, because that was his name and that's what my goal was. And that's what we were going to practice. So I would have them doing that on paper in front of me, but I could type anything I needed to up here using that feature. You want to erase it before you go on to the next one, because otherwise it saves it and it keeps coming down with you. So that was one way I was able to upgrade and downgrade this activity. There are 3 prompts. I love to give kids as many choices as I can. So sometimes if I really only needed one sentence, they could choose. Sometimes we took 2 out of 3. And then there was the little checklist here we talked about, okay, are your letters formed the way that we practice them? Are your tall letters touching the top? Do the tails go underneath? Do you have spaces between your words? Or whichever particular things that were a part of their goal, that's what we focused on for how to make our writing look the same way it did when we were in school. And that's how I described it to kids. If you were sitting next to me in the OT room, how would you do that? So that's how we sort of led up to this. So she had 3 writing prompts, and then she had the coolest fine motor activity that you need a piece of paper, a pencil in your hands. Well, all but one of my students so far have been able to come up with a piece of paper, a pencil, and their hands. One of my families just plain couldn't come up with paper, no how hard they tried. So we said, okay, find one, maybe we'll do this next week. But the whole idea is you tear a corner off of a piece of paper and you crunch up the corner. Then you draw a big circle on the big piece and you flick the paper into it. So it needs to be done on a table. But this was something that I did with them. I demonstrated on my document camera, and then they could go ahead and do it. But we do all kinds of games as OTs where we want to get that finger isolation and do that individual finger movements. So this was a great activity for that, and I really liked this one. And it didn't require supplies, which is the key to making things work. I want this to go away. Okay, so that was this activity. Then this one, we were dragging the shadows over. So one of the things I did to adapt this, if my kids could take my remote control, that was great, and I would more than like them to do that. But if they couldn't, I used that annotate feature again, and I did draw, and then I just numbered these. So now when the kids we'd look at the top and we'd say, okay, that first planet is completely flat. There's no pieces sticking out of it. Which one of the ones down underneath is a match? And then they could just tell me the number. So that was a way that they could do the activity, they could tell me, but if I couldn't give them my screen, which would have been my first choice, I could let them still figure out which was which. So the other thing about if you annotate anything in this, this way, it will carry on to your next slide. So if I lined it up right, my rockets now have numbers. And we can do the same thing here. We can find the rockets that match. And then we did a little bit of breathing at the end. She put this right in here. So we were a rocket, and we had to bring our arms up when we breathe in and bring our arms down when we breathe out. So we did some rocket breathing. And then at the very end, there's a zones check-in. So it comes back if you're using the zones with your kids and we're talking about, are we in the blue zone or the green zone? That was already built into this slide deck too. And I had to drag the astronaut. And again, if I couldn't do it, if the kids couldn't do it, then I was just able to bring it over for them. But I wanted the kids to tell me here, how were they feeling at the end of our lesson? Were we in the green zone? Were we feeling ready to go? Were we getting a little sluggish? Were we in the blue zone? But that's how I use that particular resource to get a lot of the same things I would have done with them in person all in one place. And with that one, I didn't even really have to switch back and forth between slides or do a lot of different things. That's the beauty of Google Slides, is that it lets you have everything up in one screen and requires a little less moving back and forth. So that's Google Slides. PowerPoint slides. I haven't made a thing in PowerPoint. The only thing I use PowerPoint for is to run some really cool activities. I have a dice and a spinner, and I feel like some days if I have a dice and a spinner, I can do anything. We can turn anything into a game if we have a dice and a spinner, and this platform lets me use that really nicely. So I'm going to show you one of the ones that we've been loving. And I'm gonna pause I'm gonna do a new share just to make sure it gives you what I really want. So I'm gonna say new share, do my desktop. I talk through these as I do them with my kids too. And what's interesting about that is they've kind of learned it. And then we talk about how sometimes we have to talk through things because they're new and we're just learning them. So that just gives me a chance to talk about that. So here's an awesome gross motor, motor planning, visual motor, all those kind of things, because we're playing tic-tac-toe, but we have to move in order to get a box. So if my kids want to be in this middle box here, they have to hop on one foot 10 times before we earn it. And the way that this one's set up, all you do is click it, and you can be an O. If you click it twice, you're an X. If you change your mind, you make it go away. So we play tic-tac-toe. So we're working on all those skills, plus we get in all of our movement. I think one of the big things about working online, especially if you're doing half-hour sessions, is to build movement in somewhere, somehow. So that's one of the things I like for PowerPoint. There's some great games available that let kids move as they go. The other one that I really like, I'm gonna minimize that one, and I'm gonna show you my spinner, and that's gonna take me to my next slide, because the next slide is PDF. Like, we all have PDF files that we've used with the kids and that work well. So we can still use those same files. We just have to find a way to make them interactive with the kids. So one of my favorite resources for PowerPoint to come back. Okay, so one of my favorite resources is something called Roll and Draw, and I downloaded it and purchased it from Your Therapy Source a long time ago. But what I love about it is every one of these activities here uses a dice. So this is one we've used a lot because I want kids to be silly with me, because I feel like if we're on Zoom, that's one of the things we have to do to really pull them in, is to be silly and do things that we're not great at. Because we ask kids to do that all the time in OT. We ask them to do things that are not easy for them and they're not fantastic at. So I want them to know that I'm not a fantastic artist, and that's okay. I'm going to do it anyway. And I don't sing well, but that's okay, because we can do that anyway. And I do that with them when I'm in person, so I make sure and do the same thing online. So what we do with this particular one is we roll the dice. And so now so I got a 3 when I rolled my dice. I'd come down here to number 3 and I give the kids a choice. Do you want to sing Twinkle Twinkle, or do you want to move like a bear? Or if I have kids that are really into drawing, sometimes we only draw, because I get lots of great OT work out of drawing. But if I need movement, or if I need kids to take a regulation break, then we sing or we act some of these out. The other one in here that the kids have loved is doing some drawing a monster, and it works the same way. You roll the dice, whatever you get is the part that you put on. One of the things I love about this, in addition to the visual perceptual piece, is it's like a game. We're teaching kids that everything's not always a choice. Sometimes the dice makes the choice, or sometimes the teacher makes the choice. And it's all about flexible thinking. And if we need one thing for Zoom, for us, for the kids, for everyone, it's to be able to be flexible. And I feel like this kind of thing helps to teach that flexibility nicely. Okay. So some of the other things that I've done on PDF, some of those visual perceptual things, some of them are in Google Slides, some of them are here. You can use the same, that annotate feature, and I hope I'm saying that word right. You can use the same principle of putting on a drawing and then drawing the lines to get them from where they are, or you can number them just like we did with the one that was a Google slide deck. The same kind of modifications work for it. The other thing that we've done on the PDFs is there are lots of look and find PDFs and those kinds of things. So this particular one has me look for cards. So I'm looking for the 9 of diamonds. When I find it, it says 9 of diamonds. So then I can have the kids either write it, or we can type it, or we can do one of the other things. But it's a way to bring writing into the visual perception, the computer, onto the paper. All of those kinds of things work nicely in PDF form. And then the other PDF I'm going to show you, because I'm going to talk about it later, is there's a resource out there called Little Bins for Little Hands. And they do this awesome marshmallow building activity. So this was a free download, and I have had some of my students, I've said in advance, to the parents, the next time you go to Target, the next time you do a Target drop off, any of those kinds of things, could you get a bag of marshmallows and some toothpicks? Now, I wouldn't ask every family to do that, but I have some families who, that's great. And so then what we get to do is some of that 3D building right in front of us. We get to build pyramids. We get to create triangles. It was really interesting. I did it with one of my students who has some visual differences in the way they process. And when we built this, he built a triangle. But then when he went to build the pyramid, instead of building it the way it was shown with just the 5 marshmallows, he built his triangle pyramid by actually building 3 triangles and sticking them together, which was a really interesting way to see how he saw parts rather than saw the whole. And I may or may not have seen that if we were sitting next to each other, but watching him do that and not being able to stop him earlier or to change how he was doing it or to give him verbal feedback, I was really able to see how he processed. This activity has been a huge hit. Like we've earned this. Some of my kids have had to do a certain amount of writing before or do their homework, and then the next week we get to do this, but I will definitely give you the resource for this one as well. So we talked about PDFs, boom cards. So one of the things I think that helps as an OT is to realize that a lot of what other disciplines are doing, we can use them for our own purposes and do them in our own ways. So boom cards was definitely a speech therapy activity that was designed. And it's a website and you can purchase, and then there are some free activities that you can do with kids. You can assign them if you have a paid membership, and kids can do them on their own, and then you can get feedback like they got 10 out of 11 antonyms correct or those kinds of things. Well, as an OT, I haven't found that kind of thing to be helpful, but I have found that some of the activities that are designed more for OT or that I can make OT related have been really helpful. So this is what it looks like when you go into boom cards, and it tells you how to set up your account. And this is one of those things, I found it probably 2 or 3 weeks ago. So I'm still playing with the best ways to use it, but here's my library. Here's things I've collected. I have spent less than $10 to buy some points and kind of set it up. But you go into here and you pick an activity, and you can choose to make a fast pin, which means you choose it, you set up an individual link. Students can go there and they can do the activity. I'm going to show you some activities that I already had preloaded. So these are my fast play links. Okay. So here it is. I know this is a lot of information and a lot of ideas, and it's not possible to get them all in 1 minute. I just want you to know there's stuff out there, and I want to give you places to kind of tap so that you can figure out how to really make it work for you. So these are interactive game boards, and these have a bunch of, okay, so these are all my topics. If I want to play the outer space game, because some of my kids, we started last week, we did the outer space deck. So this week when I saw them, I set up the outer space game board, and I brought back my spinner. Let me get a spinner for you. So here's my spinner. So when we played this game, we had to spin. We spun and then we moved that number of spaces. So this is another one, kids can remote control it or I can move it. But what happened was if we spun a 4 and we ended up here, whatever the letter of the week was in their classroom, we wrote that 4 times. So we might write 4 of the capital version, we might write 4 of the lowercase version. The next time we moved, we wrote a word that started with that letter, or we wrote a word that ended with that letter. So it was a way to bring my writing into a game, still tying into my space theme. So this was a fun activity on boom cards that I think that the kids, we had a blast with it. The kids have really liked, the kids like to compete. They love to compete with me. I almost never win, and I'm okay with that. But it's just a fun way to get them engaged in what we're doing. Okay, now here we go. Okay, so that's boom cards. So there's lots of fun ways to use boom cards. The other option is to do something on your iPad. If you're an iPad user and you have apps that you like, you can get any of them to show up on your screen and you can do similar things. You just have to adapt how the kids interact with them. So after we did our pigeon drawing with Mo, the next week, I remembered that I had this old app called Don't Let the Pigeon Run This App. And I have it on my iPad, and I wanted to share it with my students so they could make stories. So there's a couple different ways to do a share from your iPad. You can, it says you can share by AirPlay or you can share connecting. Today, just because I don't want to trust any of the Wi-Fi, I'm going to go ahead and share with my cord. And then the next piece you have to do, okay, come back. So here's my iPad, and here's my app.
43.
So there's different ways to make a story on this one. You can select things, you can dictate what you want it to do, but and it makes different stories. So you have to pick a snack, you have to pick a number. Sometimes I have the kids write those things down and then show me, rather than tell me. Like, we pretend we have to communicate with doing some writing back and forth, so I get some handwriting. But the app lets the kids make the story. They have a version of it that will let the kids say their responses. And it's not an easy task because it's timing and it's also being loud enough so that they can be heard. But I have some kids who love that. And so we have to work on, okay, what kind of cues do I have to give them? We're like, okay, you need to pick a snack. Okay, do you have a snack? Are you ready? And then I'll do 1, 2, 3 and push the button and record. It doesn't record great because it's like a audio coming back to me in my audio and then going into my iPad. But some of the kids love to do it, and it's worth the time to do that. So you can definitely share apps. The other thing that you can share, and I told you that I was kind of into some of the tech things. So one of the things I purchased a long time ago was Osmo. And Osmo is this little mirror and a stand that holds up my iPad. So I can put this on and I can show you how I shared a book.
She steps over the balance beam or on the balance beam sideways.
So I can show you my book, and I've shared this book with my students. It's called 6 Sticks, and I did this with my transitional kindergarten class, my kindergarten kids. And how I always used to do this book is I would come to the classroom with sticks, and I would give everybody 6 sticks, and we would make all the pictures that came up as we went along. So that was, I didn't know how to get everybody sticks, and then I was going to have them cut strips of paper to make their own sticks. Well, having scissors at home, not everybody did. It didn't really work out. So what I discovered was I needed to go back to what was working, and we needed to draw our pictures. So in 6 Sticks, this little Mac and his sister have 6 sticks, and they build different things, and they build really simple things. They're building them out. So the first thing that he builds
I think trying
is a 6. He used to put the 6 sticks, the 6 flags. So we drew the flags. So we talked about how some of the flags were rectangles, some of the flags were triangles, and we drew them. And we went through the whole book, and we would read a page, we would talk about it, and then we would draw. So I was able to get them to do some guided drawing. We kind of had a place that we were going with our drawing. Some of my kids have goals to draw triangles and squares at that level. So in here, there's a triangle flag, there's a house. So it was a way to build in their goal activity with something that kind of had them captured and interested. And I've always been in my practice, so why wouldn't I use focus when I was doing teletherapy as well? So that's a fun way. The document camera also lets you, I told you I built marshmallow structures. So I just had a white surface here, and I have my marshmallows and toothpicks, and as I put them together, then the kids could see them. And then we could talk about how they were the same or how it was working.
Typically developing, I would think, at least
so I think that was a good way to get that to work.
Because usually they're little legs the pedals very efficiently to be able
I'm hearing somebody chatting in the background. If there's any chance, thank you.
You know what I mean? You really have to have that hamstring and that heel and that
It's
ability.
Michelle.
Michelle, stop, please.
So let me get you back to my slides. Okay. So that's how you can use your iPad to do different things. And that was my document camera, and it's Osmo. And it was something that I already had, and it had a bunch of attachments that I used with it, and it worked great. But as soon as COVID-19 and we all were sent home, they put together that app that it could just be used as a document camera, which I think is invaluable. And if you don't have an Osmo, lots of schools have document cameras, lots of teachers are using them. If we're going to be doing this long term, maybe it's possible that we can ask some people to get us some document cameras, because I think for kids to be able to see us do things in that demonstration is pretty powerful. And I had trouble getting my laptop to actually give me that opportunity. So my 6 big things: get them moving, just like we did when we saw kids in the clinic or in a classroom or in our OT rooms. We had them move somehow. So whatever you did to move before, do it now on telelearning and get the kids moving, because that's the only way we're going to get 30 minutes of attention from them, is to have some place in there where they move. Be flexible probably should have been number 1, because you just never know what's going to happen to your technology, what's going to happen in the student's house, what the families are going through at that moment. This is a time of crisis for all of us, and sometimes just remembering that and knowing that we're just going to be flexible and give ourselves the grace to make mistakes. As we started doing teletherapy, our district sent something out, and one of the biggest take-home message was, give yourself the grace to make a mistake, because we're all going to do it and it's going to be okay. It's not like kids aren't going to learn if we make a mistake. Learn from everybody. Whoever's out there putting together a webinar and sharing their information, God bless them. And just, take the little piece of it that works for you and fits into your practice and use it. Screenshots. I use screenshots for documentation. So if I want samples, I have kids hold their picture up to the camera, and on my Mac, it's Shift Command 3, but whatever your computer does to take a screenshot. And then I have a whole folder of kids' work. And by now, my school kids are 7 weeks in, my private kids are 11 weeks in. They can hold their stuff up so I can get a pretty decent picture. My one tip is stop screen sharing first, and so save it to the end, because otherwise what I get is a little thumbnail of them and their picture and then whatever was on my screen. It dates it for me. It puts the name of the meeting, which was probably the name of the student, in some kind of code. So it's a good way to keep data as we're still trying to do that. Don't be afraid to be silly. Don't be afraid to say you made a mistake. Don't be afraid to not do things great. As OTs, we do that anyway. That's part of who we are, and that's how we get kids to learn. So, but don't be afraid to do that online. And then, only I knew why this popped up all the time. Okay, and do something that you did with them in person. Make the connection back to what therapy looked like at school. Let them know you're that same lady or that same gentleman who came and got me from my class and helped me do things that I needed extra practice with, or came to my class and was my support person and provided me with that extra level of confidence. So be that person on Zoom as well. And then I'm going to make sure that everybody has this list of resources, but most of these are things that I've already mentioned. Places that I've gone, Pink Oatmeal has great stuff, the OT Toolbox, but you'll get this. I just wanted you to know that it was here. And the final thing that I want to say is, if you were able to go to AOTA in 2016 when it was in Chicago, Jessica Kinski, who is a part of the couple that was impacted by the Boston Marathon bombing and who had a lot of OT, spoke at that keynote address. And one of the things that she said, and I always think about as we're OTs, is occupational therapy is a mix of science, creativity, and compassion. Well, we can do all of that online. We can follow our science. We can follow all of the areas of practice and all of the things that are important to us as OTs. We can do all that online. It's going to look different. And when this is all over and we have choices, we may not choose to do it this way forever, but this is the way that we can keep kids safe. We can keep them moving toward their goals. And you all can do this because you all are OTs and you've learned all of these ways to be creative and mix it in. And technology and science, they're going together, and compassion is what we all have. So don't be afraid to try some of these things. Okay, I made it to the spot where I want to see if you have any questions. I don't know exactly how we're going to do that. One of the things I want to tell you is my email is on here, and I'm sure you'll get a copy of the slide deck at some point. So I am your resource. Consider me one of those things on the list. If there's a way that I can help you, please let me know. My passion has always been working with kids, but it's also every time I can mentor somebody else or I can share a tip with somebody else, first of all, I always learn. If I talk to another OT and it starts out by them saying, how could I do this on Zoom? I can give you information, but I always learn from the other person. And the other piece of it is that's how we impact more kids. We show more people things that worked for us, they take it and make it work for them, and then we impact more kids. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to get questions.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
I was wanting to know the name of the virtual dice and spinner that you had used.
Yes. Okay. So the virtual spinner, I'm trying to think of my best way to show those to you. My best way to show those to you might be if you want to, two things. How about if I go and put it into my resources before I send it? Because there are two different places. One of them is from Night Therapies, and it came with the board game that I showed you. And the virtual dice, I think actually came from the same place, but I'll put it on the reference list so that you can get it. But those two things, you can do almost anything if you have a dice and a spinner, because then you have a game.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I'm sorry, can I ask a question?
Sure.
So I saw someone ask this. Do you have any good suggestions for assessments online, evaluation?
I don't, because our district has taken the position that we can't really do assessments in a way that they are meaningful and true to the standardization. So we're not doing any in the district. I will tell you that in my private practice, through the regional center, they've asked us to do some assessments just to get kids started. So I've done them play-based. I've made observations of their skills. I've dropped off toys so that they have what I need, and then ask parents to kind of facilitate some of that so I can get them started. Certainly the sensory processing measure or the sensory profile are both great ways to get some kind of standardized data to get things started with kids. But we, in our district, we put all of our assessments on hold. I work for the Napa Valley Unified School District, and we put all of our assessments on hold, and we did paperwork to bring that kind of stuff back when we are in buildings again.
Cheryl.
Yes.
I have a question. I am not a techie person, but when you are doing like the Google Slides and the PowerPoint, are you doing Zoom and then sharing your screen?
Yes.
Okay.
So that's exactly what I do, is I do almost everything on screen share. I'm sorry that I didn't say that. Yes. So I share my screen and do those. Then I can pull up Google Slides and work from them. And if I'm not using a Google Slide deck, I get all my websites or whatever I want to use open and then my top bar, and then I do the same thing. I share my screen, I share my desktop, I pick the right file and open it up from there.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Cheryl, I have a question. Are you describing doing therapy in groups or one-on-one?
So I've done both. My big group tip, I have a lot of students that I've been able to see one-on-one when we've been home, but I have done some groups. And one of the things that I do, and I learned it from all the teachers in our district, is when I'm doing a group, I put the whole group on mute when we start. And then when it's somebody's turn to answer a question, then I turn on their microphone and ask them to do that. So we've done this. I have a group. I haven't had a group larger than 3 though. I do groups of 2 and 3, and then I have some individual kids. Individual kids work better. It's easier for them because I can read their body language and what they're showing me, and I can adapt more easily. When it's a group, sometimes I kind of have to stay with it and then make it work for my students individually.
This is Carlyn. I just wanted to add to that I'm assuming people are from all over the country here at this meeting, which is wonderful. You might want to check with your district and your Department of Health and Human Services. In Wisconsin, we are not able to do group therapies because our Department of Public Instruction and our DHS have determined that the FERPA and HIPAA considerations cannot be met adequately with group teleservice for school-based therapy at this time. So just double check to be sure.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Here in California, we are doing some groups, but our district did a thing at the beginning of the year that families could opt out of teletherapy groups. So if anyone opted out of teletherapy groups, then on the other hand, we're posting things. Like we see some kids individually as well, but then we post things on either Seesaw or Google Classroom or whatever their teacher is using. We provide OT homework that way. But yeah, there are those people, and we did have a couple people opt out of doing it in this format. In Zoom in general, like the Zoom platform, if it weren't that they had suspended some of those HIPAA regulations, the only way to use Zoom and actually be HIPAA compliant is to do their kind of pricey, I think it was almost $200 a month, instead of being able to do some of the free or the district ones. But because there was some legislation, both in California on the state level and also at the federal level, regarding some of the relaxation of some of that, we're able to use just the standard Zoom. But other than that, we couldn't use that for our as our platform either. There are a lot of platforms out there. I will tell you that during the first 4 weeks when I was doing work at home and getting ready for telelearning, I tried out some other platforms. Jill Shook, who's on my resource list, maintains a great list of all the other platforms and the pluses and minuses of them, and are they HIPAA compliant, and do they have an end license agreement, and all those kinds of things. And it's a great resource for looking at other options. I tried really hard to use TheraPlatform, but in order to, I didn't find this as seamless, and because my district was going to use Zoom, I knew my capability was not to do two separate things. So I use all my clients, even some of my private ones, we use Zoom as well.
Cheryl.
Yes.
Can I just ask another follow-up question super quick? One is, well, it's a comment. Our district is requiring us to use Google because that's the district's platform. So that's one thing people should check. But the other question I have is, we have a large number of students that are seen through integrated and embedded strategies into the classroom. And we're really, in the vast majority, we're trying not to do pullouts. So part of my concern is we're kind of going back, and I think kids are thriving. The ones that are participating are thriving, but are you doing anything? We have a number of therapists around our area that are doing things with paraprofessionals that are setting up times and doing co-meets with them or co-meets with teachers. Could you speak to any experience you've had with that as well?
Yes, and I think that's exactly right. And there is that concern that our service provided in the natural environment is the best way to go. And so, yes, that we are doing some things that embed in classrooms. We are providing some things on Seesaw that work in classrooms. We are attending class meetings that the teachers have. Sometimes we'll add an activity to those class meetings. The problem is, especially with our little ones, like I have a TK class that I've talked about and a K1 STC class, and those classes, those kids have such a short attention that to embed an activity sometimes stretches them past what they can actually handle. But the idea of being part of those, we have lots of, like our behaviorists are all integrating into classroom meetings or doing individual meetings. I have things that I'm providing to some of our one-on-one facilitators that I'm providing them with activities that support these things. And then either they're a part of my session, or they are being able to continue those activities with students as well. And I do think the natural environment, once we have that as a choice, is really the better choice. And I think it depends on how your classes are running, what they're providing. So in our younger grades, they're providing 2 20-minute instruction sessions, which doesn't really give me a lot of place to embed. I do have a student that I see, so he comes to his teacher's office hours, and she helps him through his Seesaw work there because the family was struggling with it. So I show up one day a week, we go into a breakout room, and then we do a little bit of OT, and then he comes back and so we do some sensory prep and those kind of things. Then he comes back to his teacher and does his class work with her as well. So that was just a way to accommodate a family who one extra Zoom invitation was just too much for them.
I had a question about our students that don't speak English. I have a large number of Spanish speakers in my district. And what do you do with the kiddos who do not have somebody who speaks English at home?
It's super hard. I have one school like that as well. And so I have some students that way too. And so I find that once I get them online, I do okay. My hardest part was being able to get them, because in most cases, my students are speaking speak English and we do okay there, but it was the setting up. It was the getting them to the right link. It was them to understand. I had one family that I was working with an interpreter. Unfortunately, the speech therapist was working with an interpreter too, but not the same one. And so at some point the family got themselves confused. And after I thought we were totally set for them to show up for their first OT session, they didn't make it. And when the interpreter followed up, she said, well, somebody else called and said I was supposed to be on Thursday afternoon. So that language piece makes it really, really hard. And it definitely decreases our effectiveness and all of those kinds of things. And I don't speak Spanish. It would help me. I speak just enough. I can probably speak to a preschooler. You know, I can give them I can do some verbs, I can do some nouns, but that's about all that I can do. And I can understand a little bit. But that is the hardest piece I found, was that component of kids who don't speak English. And it's the same thing like when we're doing IEPs with those families. When you have an interpreter, it becomes the interpreter talking about what you're saying and then what the family's saying. And you lose that connection, which I feel like is so much better when at least we're in person and we can look at each other and we can read each other's facial expressions and all of that better. But that's a big component. And one of the things that's been hard for me too is how do I bridge that language piece?
Thank you.
With your students, does everyone have their own computer, or we have difficulties with using a phone or a tablet?
Yes, that's the hardest thing when moms are trying to hold the phone so that they can see their kids and they can see their work. And I've done whole sessions with like tops of heads of kids. All of that kind of stuff is really hard. The district here did provide Chromebooks for anybody who needed them. So most of the kids do have that option. Some families still find, especially my Spanish speaking families, who it's not like their familiar technology, then they struggle with that anyway, even though they have a Chromebook. So they end up doing phones. And I've had sessions where I had somebody appear in my waiting room and I would say admit, and then they would disappear. And so I've had some of those kind of connection things. I feel like the longer we've been doing this, the more people who are doing it. And I feel like my internet has gotten slower. They let me into our school today, even though we've been locked down. They let me into the school, into my old classroom, so that I could be on the school Wi-Fi so that I wouldn't lose you guys while we were doing this. But the technology part of it and the phone piece is really hard. And I feel like those are the times when you have to be the most flexible and you have to be able to just keep going, even though you don't totally know what kids are seeing. And keep them doing anything that we can, because the bottom line is we can't do it the way that we have always done it in the way that we think that's the best. So doing the very best we can with the situation we have is really all I can do. And sometimes when my technology slows, I stop screen sharing. Like if I find that kids are telling me that I'm freezing, and all of those kind of things are happening with the internet, then I stop and I just do face-to-face things with them. And sometimes I'll have to, I'll draw a thing on a whiteboard and I'll show it to them in my camera. So I find ways to bring my tech up from people who don't have good tech on the other side or don't have good connections.
Do you ever do anything with parents? It's like a wonderful opportunity because we don't normally do that. And I'm just wondering how you integrate that.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. And it definitely depends on the parents. I've been really lucky. Most of my kids have a mom or a dad sitting right next to them. And sometimes my bigger problem has been saying, it's okay, let them try it. It's okay, I can wait, because they want to help so much and they want their kids to do really well. But it is a good chance. And it's a good chance to say, you know what, in the classroom, one of the things that we found helps John, is that we wait. Like instead of seeing it again, I just hold on and I just give them that time to think about it. And that's a huge gift. And I'm going to try and do that online too. So yeah, that coaching, because I see regional center kids. So those are kids under 3 as well. That's part of my private practice. Those families, it's all parent coaching. It's all, okay, let's talk about the toys you have. Let's talk about how you build their play skills. Let's talk about the next step. Let's talk about all those kinds of things. Or food's hard for you. Let's do a session where we eat. And I'm going to give you some ideas on how to make that a little bit easier. Or I'm going to tell you what might be hanging us up here. So yeah, the parent coaching part is huge. And it's really cool because we can't do that at school. Yeah, I love that part of it. That's been a cool thing about Zoom. I feel like there's been 2 amazing things. Our contact with parents, and they know us, and they know what we're doing for their students, and they know how much we love their students. And the other thing that's been great in my situation is our teams here in the district have really stepped up. And so every morning I meet with one of my teams for half an hour. And some mornings it's just to talk about what went wrong on our Zoom sessions yesterday, or what do we have planned for this week? Or you know what, this student keeps missing. Have you seen that too? How are you getting to them? How are you connecting with them? So that team team connection piece is improved, and our ability to connect with parents. And that's the bright side of distance learning.
I have a few I'll try to stick to just 2 questions, but I think one of the biggest things is working with kids that do not have the functional skills that you're talking about. I have a lot of like developmental preschool students that I'm finding that, you know, doing this teletherapy with for 30 minutes is just not, they can't sit there through a PowerPoint and they can't write. And so and then going off of that, how do you manage your time? Because I have 68 kids on my caseload and I don't understand how I'm going to be able to go to all the team meetings, go to all the Google Meets, have 30-minute sessions with each kid every week. I feel like, you know, we're going to be working 24/7.
You're right. And that's a humongous caseload. And I thought I had a big caseload, which has been as high as 62 here at school. But that's a huge caseload. And you're right. And I think one of the things our district did was say that our distance learning plan isn't going to replace the learning that we were doing at school and isn't going to be exactly the same. And so we don't have to provide necessarily 30 minutes of therapy direct, because part of what we do is consult. So that's the reason for doing those team meetings, is in the mornings we get to talk about the students. And so there's some consult time for each student that we do in those team meetings. And then there's getting some things ready and posting things on their classrooms. And then I know that our speech therapists here, you know, some of those kids have even see speech more than once a week. And they've had to cut back some of their minutes. We've done some alternating week scheduling, done some of those kind of things. And little ones don't last 30 minutes unless it's something like, unless you're doing 2 or 3 Go Noodles and that's keeping you really busy. They don't last a full 30 minutes. We've done a lot of 20-minute sessions. And I think that's been helpful because then there's a minute to document at the end and some of those kinds of things. I think that really helps. I think that I start each week with sort of a big overall picture, but then I know I've got to adapt it for kids. And sometimes I have 2. Sometimes I have things for my really little guys, and sometimes I have things for my older kids. And that when we get into those kids are in more of that developmental preschool, it's really becomes more of a parent coaching model is the thing that I found that works, is to give parents ideas on how to play with their kids and listen to the parents on what's working at home and what's not working at home. And how do we support that? And while I feel like I have a goal in a certain direction, like there's a particular thing I'm trying to achieve for them at school, there are all kinds of foundational developmental things that I can do with them to get them there. So I don't have to have them do exactly what their goal says. What I can do is build the fine motor. So I might ask parents of those age kids just to have blocks. Could you just dump out some blocks? And we're going to play with blocks when I get online. I try and have a parallel toy, and I show parents ways to build things and ask kids to mimic what we do. Or I have kids build something and then I imitate it. Or sometimes we work on just getting 3 instead of 2 blocks to stand on each other. And I show parents how, if we're sitting down, this works best. If we get it up a little higher, or if we have kids sitting in a comfortable chair with the right height table. And sometimes I feel like what we go back to is those basic things that we set up for them when they're in the OT room, but nobody sets them up at home. And if we can teach somebody how to set them up at home, think of all the progress that they can make if they just have those little pieces in place. So it's about going back to those little things that we do automatically in our classroom and teaching parents some of that. But you're right, I have kids who can't do Google. I have a couple of kiddos who are in middle school, they're in the moderate to severe class, and the best thing that I can do is every week get on with their teacher meetings and talk to the parents and ask them how it's going working on, we have one kid working on snacks. How's that going? Is they able to get those open? Well, what if you snip them this week? Just give them a tiny snip at the top so they pinch better. And then next week fade that. Like next week we won't do that. Or they'll say, he can't open, I have a big wide jar and I want him to open it. Well, we can talk about how the fact that his little hand doesn't fit the big wide jar. So do you have a Tupperware container that's different? Or how can you set that up differently and build those fine motor? And again, it goes back to parent coaching with that age, which isn't always what we do in schools, but it's the only thing I found that's worked at this point.
No, that does make more sense. I just feel like, you know, I have a lot of students with CP or they're pretty severely impacted. And so it's just thinking about how to connect with the parents, because honestly, and I'm sure this is across the board too, parents aren't always responsive. And you get to a certain point where you're like, you know, are they going to respond to me? Do they want this information? And so I guess that's part of navigating this whole COVID thing. But I do appreciate it's definitely a mind shift of, you know, focusing on parent coaching versus just working with the kids.
It is. And our district let us give parents the option to say, I don't want to do Zoom every week. I want you to post things for me. We have one of our therapists in the district works in a lot of the functional skills classrooms with kids who definitely have more physical needs. And what she has done is put together a YouTube channel. And so she's put together different yoga exercises and different movement things. And I think that she's doing some of the, like, I was teaching setting the table, some of those kinds of things that they do in the classroom. And she's put those on a YouTube channel. And then she has office hours and she lets people come to her with questions. And she doesn't see her kids every week on Zoom, because if kids are getting all those services in the schools and parents are now trying to do what we did with their kids, plus what they do 24 hours a day, also trying to work, like we have to give people the option to say, I don't need Zoom right now. I'd rather you give me some things that I can try when I have time. And then putting those activities into people's routines, like we always did as OTs. When I was working with babies and people would say, well, how many times should I do that gentle movement thing that you showed me? Well, what about at diaper changes or embedding it into their natural routines? And if we can do some of that, then I think we continue to provide that valuable, unique service.
Question.
Well, thanks for I really appreciate this. I was curious, so I did see in the chat box that a lot of people were sharing their email addresses. Are you sharing this, or are we going to see this somewhere else for the resources?
Therapy Travelers will post all of this webinar to our website, and that will be posted very likely by the end of the day, but at latest by the end of the day tomorrow. So
okay,
no need
so
to
there's
get
no
on
need
a
to put
list.
emails?
No need to get on a list at all.
Okay, thank you.
And maybe we can take one last question. I know that everybody has to get back to work.
One quick question. Is there any idea how you are going to handle any kind of comp time for the kids in the fall?
So it's going to be up to our districts to tell us what they need us to do. I think that my district is feeling like our distance learning plan has been what we said it was going to be. When we do IEPs now, we're writing in what the distance learning plan is, and that will continue until we're back in the buildings. In California, we're hearing maybe a hybrid model, maybe kids will be at school part-time. Our next OT group is going to talk about, okay, what if we go back? And how do we provide our service being 6 feet apart and wearing a mask and all those things that are going to be required of us? So I don't know that it is even the fall, but we're not necessarily talking about I think it will depend on individual families and individual cases. I think in some cases, the kids have received almost as many minutes, at least in the OT range, because I had enough kids opt out and that I posted things for and was able to really provide and able to get kids online. I know that the school I'm at, the kids had a lot of things that were provided for them, and the district has done a ton of legwork and laid things out for them. I know that I was really lucky in that. So I don't know what other districts are going to have to do. I think it's going to depend on what all of the regs are. I know that when they put this out here in California, they said there was a pretty specific thing, as I understood it, that we didn't have to, it wasn't about minute for minute. It was about continuing to provide the service in the best way that you can, given the circumstances that we had. So I don't know what that's going to look like for any of us in the fall.
Margaret, thank you. I'm sorry. Cheryl, thank you so much. Your information was absolutely amazing. Your energy is so inspiring. I can only begin to imagine the value that you've brought to the kids in such an unforeseen time and unforeseen circumstance. And I thank you for being willing to speak into all of us and provide your tools and resources. And I value so much that you were, encouraging everybody to share ideas and share new ways of doing things. The time has been unprecedented for everybody. And I just am so, I admire how you've risen to the occasion in this. And I so appreciate you being open to sharing your research and also your great successes with all of us. Thank you all for joining. We just wish you the best. If you haven't already, feel free to check out our website. We have a ton of other webinars on there, and I know even Cheryl had referenced one from Margaret Curley, and we have a few on there that, although they're delivered by a speech language pathologist, they do offer some really valuable content related to remote learning as a whole. So if you have any other questions or suggestions, there's also a place on the website at the link that I posted in the chat. Feel free also to, if we have enough of a certain type of question, or we can get them answered collectively and post answers on the website. We're all about making sure that as a team, as a big collective team of people that are trying to serve children and make the lives of kiddos more complete and better, especially in this time, we'd like to ensure that we are able to provide answers also as a community. So, feel free to send in questions or feedback or anything that you feel like is either needed or lacking after this time together, and we can certainly arrange for, future either conversations, or the information will be posted on the website. So with that, again, Cheryl, you are just an inspiration. Thank you so much. And you all have a lovely rest of your week. And we're here to support whatever it is that needs to happen for you guys to have a successful upcoming new year. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.